Good morning and welcome to another talk in the Naturally Managed Menopause series. My name's Sally Varley and I am a fertility and menopause specialist, and today I'm talking to Danny Adamson, who is going through early menopause. So before we get into I like your positive attitude about it. So before we get into hearing about Danny's experience, I just was going to explain to you, in case you don't know, that anybody under the age of 45 who's having menopausal symptoms, it's considered to be early menopause. And if you are under 40 and your periods have become irregular or they've stopped, then that's definitely a case when you would want to go to the doctor and get some tests done, because you may have what's called premature ovarian insufficiency, POI. So what's happening when we go into menopause is that estrogen levels are falling and eventually the ovaries stop producing eggs altogether. And obviously if this is happening before the age of 45, then it's going to have an impact on your fertility and your sort of general well-being, and you may not realise that that's what's going on. So apparently there are around 1 in 100 women in the UK are going through early menopause under the age of 40. And something to be aware of is that when you're having POI, ovarian function can be intermittent. So when you're in sort of normal, proper menopause at the right age, your ovaries are just, slowing down, and eventually they will stop producing eggs altogether. Whereas with POI, sometimes they may produce eggs or not. And so you may have the occasional bleed and you may actually be fertile. And apparently, again, there's around 5 to 10% of women who can conceive even when they have POI. So it's a reason to, again, get tested to make sure that if you've done having your children or you want to have children, it's like the door's not completely shut. So you need to just get on the case with that. So Danny, can you tell us a bit more about how it's come about for you and what it feels like?
Do you know, it's interesting that you just talked about that because I'm 46, like we discussed earlier, but I was diagnosed early menopause a couple of years ago, so obviously underneath the 45 age, but I haven't had periods in years and years, so I probably was in that stage that you talked about, but nobody ever diagnosed me and told me that's what it was. I just stopped having them, but funnily enough now I actually do occasionally have a bleed, so that's interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, sorry, go on.
Well, so how many years would you say you were not having periods?
Oh gosh, at least 5 years.
Okay.
Maybe more, because it was before I lived where I currently live. At least a good 3 or 4 years before I lived yes, it's been a long time. Mm-hmm. So they didn't do any tests. They just said, oh, sometimes it happens.
Well, was that something that worried you, or did you just think, oh well, that's just...
No, I was quite delighted by that. I have my kids. I think, oh, no periods, fantastic.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was a couple of years ago that I went to the doctor. It was actually for something different, but I got some blood tests done, and that's where they said that I was in early menopause. So that's how I found out. And what at the time I was, and I don't think I've ever felt anxious or had any anxiety, but I started to have anxiety. It was around about December time.
That's when December just gone?
No, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, yeah.
Yeah, and which was completely out of the blue and not normal for me. So I didn't really understand why that was happening. And then obviously after that, I then had tests, and that's when they said that that's what that I was going through any early menopause.
Right.
So
was that a shock when you got that news?
Kind of, but then I mean, there are lots of people that I have obviously looked into it since then that are much younger than me that do go through it. So no, I just kind of said, okay, it's not the worst thing that it could be,
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that because I know you've got 2 teenagers, so you've had your family, and that's fine. Yeah, you were ready to, definitely not wanting to have any more children. So that probably puts you in a bit of a different life stage, doesn't it, than somebody who's still trying to conceive, because actually there are nowadays more women over the age of 40 having babies for the first time than there are at 20. So that's a massive turnaround, even in just one generation, because I mean, my mum had her children, my sister was born when my mum was 21 or 22, just 22, and she'd had 4 children by the time she was 29. I didn't have my son till I was 39, and I'm the same age as you. So, you know, there are women having babies into their 40s. And if I just think that, you know, like you said, well, my periods just stopped and I just didn't really think anything about it, and the doctor didn't say anything. And, you know, if you, to me, because I'm, as you know, like very much into holistic health, and I've only been on the pill a couple of times in my life, and it really didn't agree with me. And I like having my regular cycle, because it's such a good barometer of our overall health and well-being. So to me, if my cycle goes a bit astray, then I know that there's something not quite right with me. But like you said, there's lots of women who love not having a period, because let's face it, I mean, it is a bit of a hassle, isn't it? And if we didn't have to, I mean, even if you don't have bad periods, it still it affects, you know, our energy and our mood and all that kind of thing. So I can see the attraction of not having a bleed every month, but we want to be sure that it's not sort of covering up any other you know, deeper issue. So just to explain to people as well, when the type of blood test that you would have would be testing for something called follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH. And through our fertile years, this is on a feedback loop. So every month your brain sends a message down to the ovaries saying this follicle stimulating thing to stimulate the follicles to produce an egg. And so if it finds that there are no eggs being produced, the message goes back to the brain, and then it sends an even louder message. So it's like it starts to shout louder and louder, going, give me some eggs. And obviously, if that's just not happening, then FSH levels are going to be high, and that's what your blood test will have picked up on. So what happened then? The doctor said you're in early menopause, and then you said that they've put you on the pill.
Yeah.
And how long?
That's all they did.
Okay.
How long have you been on it?
Yeah.
A couple of years now.
And is that just something that you will carry on? I mean, you'll need to come off it at some point to find out whether you're like out the other side.
Yeah. Well, you go for regular checks, don't you, with the pill anyway? So they check it, and they have changed it as well to so now I have the mini pill.
Yeah.
And they recommend coming off that once every 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I have lots of the symptoms of menopause, but I don't have I don't have really bad. It's manageable with the pill at the moment.
Yeah. Do you I know that you said you sometimes get hot flushes and have trouble sleeping. Are there any particular things you do to help ease those symptoms?
Well, yeah, the hot flushes, I don't tend to get them in the daytime. They tend to always be at night. And so I do wake up very, very hot. The only thing that helps for me to not have them so much is to not drink alcohol. Or I know if I do drink alcohol, they're going to be 10 times worse.
Yeah.
So that's the consequence.
Yeah, and I'm sure people watching will relate to that, because it is something that as women it's much harder for our bodies to process alcohol as we get older. So yeah, it's definitely a thing to watch out for. And early menopause is not actually hereditary, but sometimes it does seem to run in families. Do you know if your mum had early menopause or?
Do you know, I think she did go through quite a difficult stage. So I don't know whether that was early, because I can't think how old she was then. But she did go through quite a difficult stage, which must have been linked to that.
Yeah, and maybe again, if you weren't really tested and it wasn't flagged up as a possibility, then it's likely that she wouldn't have been either. But I suppose I would recommend to the viewers, if it's always a good idea to, if you can, if your mum is still around, to ask her what her experiences were with pregnancy, with menopause, all that kind of thing, because it can indicate that you might go into the same type of thing. But also I'm always keen to let women know that just because everybody in your family, all the female members, have had painful periods for years or whatever, it doesn't mean that that's your fate too. And there are so many things that we can do to help menopause. And as you know, I've got an online program that I run, which addresses all aspects that affect our symptoms, and deals with toxins and getting better sleep and our gut health, our emotions, our relationships, all of that, because it also coincides with a busy time in women's lives when, like, your children are teenagers now. If I go into menopause at the sort of average age, which is 51, my son's going to be 15, so that's going to be an absolute joy. Is he 15? Yeah, no, maybe he's going to be like 12 or something. God, I can't even do the maths. So I think I suppose the purpose of today, I just wanted to let people have a sort of think about what symptoms might be going on, and if they are not the kind of predictable age to be perimenopausal and they're having these kind of symptoms, then to just go and talk to your doctor or get checked out, because it could be that. Other things that can cause menopause are underlying medical conditions like Addison's disease or Down syndrome, an autoimmune disease like type 1 diabetes, and also some women, if they've had cancer treatment, particularly to the pelvic area, and if you've had to have a hysterectomy or part of your ovaries removed or anything like that, sometimes that can send women into early menopause. So those are all just things to be aware of. So
I would also just go back to the anxiety thing and just say, if you are feeling like that, then definitely get it checked out, because that for me was the worst part about the whole thing. There's the night sweats and the itchiness and all the other stuff that comes with it.
Yeah.
You deal with that, the emotional side of it. That was something I'd never experienced before, and it was I didn't understand why it was happening to me, and I couldn't seem to kind of get myself out of it. So if you are feeling like that, I would definitely get checked out.
Yeah. So did you was that something that you brought up to the doctor, and then or did you just kind of muddle your way through it, and now has the anxiety gone away now?
Yes, it has. And the pill really helped with that. So I did go in for that reason, but there was something else that they tested, that I had blood tests for anyway. So that wasn't linked to that necessarily, but I did ask about that when I was at the doctor's.
Yeah, because it's one of the incredibly common things is that perimenopausal women go to the GP saying, I'm suffering anxiety and depression, or just anxiety, and they get prescribed antidepressants, and it's when actually they may need lifestyle changes and hormone therapy, and antidepressants will not help in that scenario. And so it's sort of prolonging women getting the help that they actually need, and feeling like they're kind of going crazy because they know they don't feel okay, but they're just left perhaps feeling that they're being a bit neurotic or there's something wrong, and so
surely that's just masking the problem if you are given antidepressants when that isn't really, like you say, there's other stuff that you can do to help.
Yeah, And it happened to one of my clients recently. I mean, because she had quite a lot of symptoms for a few years that she'd tried her best to manage, but eventually it got to the point she's like, oh, I've had enough. And she did a lot of research and went off to the GP, and he straight away said, oh, here you go, I'm going to give you some antidepressants. And she had to really hold her ground and say, no, I don't want that, I need hormones. This is what I want. So she got it, and she very quickly notice an improvement. And and she said, oh, I'm in such a better mood, I'm sleeping now, which I think is one of the things that makes a massive difference, doesn't it? And so if she hadn't been able to just sort of stand up for herself and say to him, no, this is, because I think we often get that feeling like doctors know it all, and they're the authority and they're the expert, but actually GPs, they're a general practitioner, so they've not often gone into any kind of detail on any of these things, and they just try the first thing on their list, and if that doesn't work, then they'll go to the next thing. So I think it's up to us to sort of empower ourselves with the knowledge of what we need to help us feel better, and then ask for it. But I get the fact that not every person feels like they can say that kind of thing to their GP, or they might not be working with someone that's very sympathetic. So that's why I'm doing all these talks and putting as much info out there that I can, because I really want women to have a good menopause and to realize it doesn't have to be a horrendous time in life, and it's actually a time when you can thrive and be healthy and happy. So
yeah, and it's great that you're doing this to raise awareness for women as well, because there are lots of women that that are going through it that don't realise, and there are so many ways to deal with it, like you talk about, that are natural and that will help so much. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thanks so much for talking to me today. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. Stay safe.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I seem to say on everything at the moment.
Yeah, so thank you, Danny, and it's really kind of you to share your experience with us. I'm sure that will have helped explain a few things to some women that are thinking, oh, I'm not going nuts after all.
Yeah.
And I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.